Hello and welcome back to Unsolicited Film Reviews. I'm Zach Miller. The man on screen right is Martin Cook. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Today we're tackling the behemoth in the form of the career of one Steven Spielberg. Perhaps you've heard of him. We have some programming notes to get through before our box office report this week, though. Last week, when I mentioned that Sinners was the most successful domestic original film since inception in 2010, Martin posed the question, what about Oppenheimer? To which I had no immediate answer. It only dawned on me after we finished recording, and I know we both know this, that Oppenheimer was, of course, based on the book American
Course.
Prometheus.
Of course it was. Yeah.
So that was a rare double brain fart for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Second, I did indeed pick How to Train Your Dragon in our box office draft. I thought Martin picked it, so that was my fuck up. And we need to acknowledge,
Not a fuck up to pick it though.
yeah, that's for sure. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But we do need to acknowledge Andrew Turner 125 or 175, Lena Richardson 5402, and Kimmy Giordano 2149 for their kind comments. Keep them coming. I have low self-esteem, so any ego boost is a good one for me. So Kimmy Giordano, aka my mom, had a question about our thoughts on honorary Oscars with Tom Cruise set to be honored this November. So, do you have any just off the cuff thoughts on honorary Oscars in general?
Not really. This isn't the first time that they've done them. They've done them usually for people a bit older than Tom Cruise, but I guess they figure at this point there's maybe not much chance Tom Cruise is going to be up for a regular acting Oscar, and yet his contribution to film is so undeniable that they figure might as well give it to him. I don't have a problem with them. I think it's a perfectly fine thing to do. And then also, as always in these kinds of things, they're trying to get eyeballs to the actual telecast. And if people see, oh, Tom Cruise is getting an award, maybe more people will tune in.
Yeah, it is weird that he's getting an Oscar in November though, instead of January during the proper ceremony. And I don't know if
Oh
they
yeah, I figured they would actually do something also at the ceremony to have him there, or else really there's no point.
yeah, they're just gonna have him like behind closed doors. Here's a gold statue. Thanks for all your
Yeah,
trouble.
put it up on their Twitter feed. Great.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, it's not like a real quote unquote Oscar, but it's nice that they're acknowledging him and all of his efforts, especially to because what the Academy said is not only is he doing all of his own stunts and contributing to the art of stunt work, but he basically got movies back on their feet during the pandemic. So yeah, I don't have a problem with it by any
Oh
means, but it's not like a real award.
no, of course not.
So, with that housekeeping out of the way, Martin has our weekly box office report. Take it away, partner.
Yeah, and once again, yeah. So you're with How to Train Your Dragon. You're just absolutely kicking my ass in our summer blockbuster draft. In my defense, a lot of my movies haven't come out yet, but I'm starting to get a little worried about my third and fourth choices. Elio, I'm just really not sure how that's going to do, and then I have no idea how people are going to respond to the retro superhero thing of Fantastic Four. Still feeling good about my first two, but you're way in the lead at this point. Maybe next week we'll actually have a running total, but you're so far ahead of me at this point because, as you said, you had How to Train Your Dragon. That was the number one movie this past week, 84.6 million opening weekend, and it's already at 218.6 million worldwide. Lilo and Stitch, also one of yours, another 15.7 million on the weekend. In its fourth weekend, it's now over 860 million worldwide. The other newcomer to the list this week, Materialists, had a $12 million opening weekend, about 15 million worldwide. This is a movie that I've seen, it obviously did relatively well, but I've seen some confusion about it because it was billed kind of as a romantic comedy. And apparently people saw it and it's not really a romantic comedy.
Okay.
Well, at least it's not really much of a comedy. It's a little more serious, but should expect that from the filmmaker. But anyway, it did relatively well. And then coming in fourth place, also in its fourth weekend, like Lilo and Stitch, Mission Impossible, 10.5 million weekend. It's at about 510 million worldwide at this point. And then Ballerina, which opened last week, in its second weekend, it's already down only to 9.7 million weekend. So it wasn't the big hit that we thought it might be. And it's at about 94 million worldwide. So definitely not up to the level of a lot of the other John Wick movies.
Yep, and yeah, I still have three movies. Three out of my five picks are still on the top five list here. So I mean, I'm definitely blowing my wad super early in the
Yeah,
summer, but the risk may pay off considering the returns that we're seeing right now.
it could. Yeah, I'm banking a lot on F1 and Superman to come.
Well, I already bought three tickets for F1, so that's going to contribute to your efforts.
Thanks for helping the cause.
Yeah. So coming this week, there's only three wide releases, and it's Elio, as you just mentioned, the Pixar movie, 28 years later, which is getting stellar reviews, and of course, it's the sequel to 28 weeks later, 28 days later, 28 weeks weeks later.
Yeah.
And then we have Bride Hard. It's a Rebel Wilson led action comedy, which may find a niche. I'm not expecting huge things from it, but I'm expecting it might do well if she still has an audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it for the wide releases of new movies. And the only other thing I could find was the 20th anniversary of Brokeback Mountain is being released via Fathom Events, which is in most American theaters, AMC, Cinemark, and things like that. I don't know what it does foreign theaters, but
Yeah, I'm not sure, for instance, in Canada where it's playing, I'm sure there's at least a few screenings.
so Steven Spielberg, one of the very few directors that's a bona fide household name. In fact, I think you could say that Spielberg is almost synonymous with the word director, the way that Einstein is shorthand for a really smart person. Even if you don't know anything about movies, you know the name Steven Spielberg. Um, like what can be said about the man and his story career that hasn't already been said before? But we're going to try.
We sure are.
Obviously, to cover his entire life and career would take hours, if not days. So, but we value your time as well as ours. So we're paring this conversation down to a mere two episodes. And I realize this fedora that I just put on is way more Smokey the Bear than it is Indiana Jones.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
got
what
it
are you
kind
gonna
of
do?
looking like Pharrell a little bit there.
But so, how did this iconic figure in worldwide media start his life?
So let's go through a little bio of one Steven Spielberg. He was born December 18th, 1946 in Cincinnati, but he mostly grew up in the Phoenix area. His parents split up when he was about 15, and for years he blamed his father because his father was the one that technically left. What he didn't really understand until later was that it was actually his mother who split them up to be with Spielberg's father's best friend, which is kind of questionable. And so, especially in his early films, you see a lot of absent fathers. And it wasn't until much later when they actually reconciled. He's also talked about facing discrimination because of his Jewish background and kind of being embarrassed by it when he was a kid because they lived in areas where there really weren't many other Jewish families. And so he would kind of push it to the background and not pretend that he wasn't Jewish, but really not bring it up at all. Now, in a scene that he included in his semi-autobiographical film, The Fablemans, his parents took him to see Cecil B. DeMille's Greatest Show on Earth. And he was fascinated by a train crash scene. And so he took to recreating it at home with his little model train set and filming it. And that was his introduction to film. And throughout his childhood, he would go to movies every week. He's mentioned in particular being awestruck by Lawrence of Arabia that he went to see one week. So he went back the next week. and the next week and the next week and just kept watching it. And pretty soon he borrowed his dad's 8 millimeter camera and was making films all the time. Like he even
And
made,
just to interject for a quick second there, yeah, we
yeah,
almost didn't have Steven Spielberg as a director because he wanted to not even be a filmmaker because he thought he was never going to be able to make a film as good as Lawrence of Arabia. So,
yeah.
yeah,
And
sorry.
and he says that he rewatches it at least once a year still to this day. So obviously a major influence on him. He even made that. So as a kid, he's filming all these things, obviously home movies and everything. He even made a 40-minute war film with a bunch of his classmates as students when he was 13 years old. So pretty crazy. When he finished high school, obviously he moved to LA because that's by this point he had decided it was absolute he was going to be a filmmaker. But his grades weren't that great, and so he couldn't actually get into USC Film School. So he's trying to find a way in Hollywood, and one day he goes on a tour of Universal Studios. And the story goes that at one point there was a bathroom break. And so he kind of
On the
hid this
tour,
on the tour. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So he hid in the stall and he didn't come out until he was sure that everybody else was gone. And then he got out and just wandered around the studio. So there are legends of him hanging around the Universal lot in these days. Some people talk about him basically wandering into buildings and then finding an empty office and taking it over for a couple of months at a time and things like that. Basically, he spent a lot of time on the Universal lot, sneaking onto the lot most of the time because he didn't really have a job or any reason to be there. But he was still making a lot of his films. And he came to the attention of Sid Sheinberg, who was the head of television for MCA Universal. And Sid had seen his short film Amblin, which you may recognize the name. And he signed him to a 7-year contract to direct television. And so that's how he got his start.
Yeah,
Now,
that was unheard of for a guy that young. I
yes,
think he
he
was
was 20 years
26.
old at that
Oh,
time.
oh yeah.
Yeah. 20 years old to be hired as, and he just basically made a few short films to be hired to direct television on a 7-year deal. Crazy. So obviously he owes a lot to Sid Sheinberg and has basically said that that's been his mentor. Just a couple of other short notes before we get into those films that he then started making. At the time, he was a part of a group and friends with a bunch of young filmmakers, all kind of around the same age and the same level in their careers in the 70s. And that included George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma. Like, it's pretty amazing. They all became incredibly successful. And they were all very supportive of each other. They would show each other their films, but there was a bit of competition. They wanted to one up each other all the time.
Sure, yeah.
And so they've collaborated on a bunch of things. Like Spielberg actually shot a scene in Scarface. I didn't realize that until a few
Oh,
days ago.
okay. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
The scene where all the Colombians are running up the stairs near the end, and
Oh, the climax.
yeah, yeah. Well, particularly that part with them running up the steps and all that. Yeah, Spielberg actually shot that. Apparently, he just
Wow.
was on set one day and but De Palma decided to hand over the reins to Spielberg. Pretty crazy.
And
And
that's
then
one of the most
obviously he
memorable
collaborated
scenes.
with
Yeah.
yeah, and then obviously he collaborated with George Lucas. But like any good filmmaker, he's had some really important collaborations, and I think we should just briefly mention four. We don't need to really talk about them, but John Williams, pretty obvious. We talked about that in our composers one. Kathleen Kennedy, who
Mm.
is the co-founder of Amblin Entertainment, her first ever production credit as a producer was E.T., which is pretty
Jesus.
lucky and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then she's produced tons of his other movies. Spielberg's also worked with the same editor on every movie except one since Close Encounters, a guy named Michael Kahn. And then he's also worked with Janusz Kaminski as his director of photography or cinematographer on a lot of his films. So that's kind of his group. What else? Let's go one more thing, just themes, because there are so many common themes throughout a lot of his things. Obviously, children, a lot of his childhood, divorce comes from his childhood. Underdogs battling bullies is a
For
big
sure.
theme in a lot of his movies. discovery and wonder, which again I think comes from him discovering film and all these things as a kid. And then from his own words, he says that a lot of his films involve separation and reunification. And I
Mm,
think we'll see
hmm.
that as well through as we go through a bunch of these films. So let's get to the movies then.
Yeah, but just to piggyback on that before we get to the
Yeah.
real films, yeah, Lucas, Scorsese, Spielberg, Coppola, De Palma, all friends, and I would recommend anybody who's even a mild fan of Spielberg to go watch the HBO documentary entitled Spielberg, and you get a lot of good nuggets from that. And one of them was that George Lucas has the nerve to say that when they were young, Spielberg was too Hollywood for his taste. And for George Lucas to say
That's pretty
that's a
funny.
quote that does not age well at
No,
all.
no. Although at the time, it's kind of funny. That probably would have been true because he was the one getting a steady paycheck doing all this television directing, and he was the one with the contract. Whereas the other
Exactly
guys were at that time were a bit more outsiders. So it is kind of funny that hearing that from George Lucas.
how the tables turn.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Firelight, 1964, Spielberg's very first film. It was a feature-length sci-fi film at 135 minutes, and his age, 1964, that's crazy to be able to direct that. So it debuted at the Phoenix Little Theater on a budget of $500, and according to the Spielberg mythology, it made $501 at the box office, grossing a grand total of $1.
For netting a total of $1. Yes. Yeah, and it's like I've never seen it, but apparently it's sort of an early precursor to Close Encounters. It's he used a lot of it, went back and mined a lot of that stuff when he eventually made Close Encounters, which we'll get to.
Hmm.
His next big thing that we should mention was in 1971 a movie called Duel, which was made for Universal Television. This is part of his contract and aired as an ABC Movie of the Week. It's about a traveling salesman who becomes followed and terrorized on the road by the driver of a big truck. And a funny little anecdote from that Spielberg documentary that the studio at the end they thought it was fantastic, except they were really disappointed that the truck didn't blow up when it crashed at the end. And he's like, "No, I'm not going to do that. I took all this time to make this incredibly great, detailed crash scene. I don't just want to blow the thing up." But
Which is what kind of happens in Jaws later as well.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I've never seen the whole thing, but I've seen a bunch of clips from it, and I wonder if George Miller watched Duel, or was a fan
Oh,
because I can definitely see some Mad Max stuff in there, and then also there's a lot of Duel in something like Death Proof.
hmm.
So I think it's probably, for a not very well-known film, it's probably fairly influential.
Yeah, anything built around an entire car chase with the whole going back and forth. Yeah, definitely. I can see that. So then we had the Sugarland Express, while Spielberg had some TV movies, most notably Duel, of course, this was his theatrical debut. It's a crime chase film with Goldie Hawn and William Atherton. Its real importance, though, is that it marks the first collaboration between Spielberg and composer John Williams.
Yeah, this one I had never seen this, and of all his theatrical things in his early days, this was the only one I hadn't seen. So I actually went and rented it this week, and it's interesting. It's got a lot of elements of Bonnie and Clyde, which
Hmm.
obviously was before, but I think it also presages later movies like Thelma and Louise and Natural Born Killers in a number of ways. So it's definitely interesting, and you can see just his natural talent for filmmaking.
Yeah, yeah, he is just the definition of a natural.
He really is.
This
Yeah.
guy was born to be what he is. And again, I can't stress enough how good the HBO documentary is on him because you really get to see that and all the people that he's worked with throughout the years. But you're here with us right now. So
Yes. So that takes us to Jaws. So this is the big one. It was released June 20th, 1975. So that is the reason we're doing this episode. That it is, well, for us tomorrow, for when this is released, probably the day of, this would be the 50th anniversary of the release of Jaws. And this was obviously based on a 1974 book by Peter Benchley, starred Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw. Now, this production was interesting because Spielberg obviously was still pretty young, didn't really know, but extremely ambitious, extremely confident, despite the fact that he didn't
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
know what he was doing most of the time. Like this movie, it was the first movie really almost completely shot on water. It went way over budget. A lot of people around Hollywood thought it was going to be a disaster. Spielberg had no idea how to shoot on water. Like, for instance, he didn't understand that the sky, how the sky is, will change the color of the water. And so
And
he'd shoot,
tides. Yeah.
yeah, and so he'd shoot different things and then realize that the continuity wasn't there. You couldn't stitch them together because they looked totally different. So there's so many stories about the making of this movie. You know, the problems with the mechanical shark meant that a lot of the actually ended up being a good thing for the movie because it meant a lot of the danger had to be implied. They had to use barrels to float things at times, but then they incorporated that into the shots and into part of the film. But let's just say, as an understatement, this was a massive fucking hit. I mean, it basically created the concept of the summer blockbuster. It had a record of the time opening weekend of $7 million, which, 1975 people. It recouped its production costs in 10 days, despite being way over budget and way late. In 78 days, it had passed The Godfather for the biggest movie of all time. And it is the seventh highest grossing movie of all time today, adjusted for inflation. So just a huge hit, made Spielberg into the hottest commodity in Hollywood.
Yeah, and I read this entire magazine today behind me. If you're just
Oh, nice.
listening, Life magazine had the entire magazine was 90 pages of Jaws. I mean, that includes pictures and shit like that. But yeah, like we know that Robert Shaw was a drunk on set, but that was a trend between everybody drinking, everybody being stressed out for how long it's been going on, and they did the predecessor to Percocet. I think it was Percodone or something like that. Anyway, that's like what our parents would have done in the 70s. But yeah, there's a lot of stress on that set, and like I never knew that Bruce the shark. I always knew that the shark's name was Bruce, but I didn't know
Yeah.
that was named after Spielberg's attorney at the time.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's funny. A shark. Yeah. Shark is the lawyer. That's good.
Yeah, one of the greatest monologues of all time with Robert Shaw's Quint
Yeah.
and
The USS Indianapolis
mhm.
monologue. Yeah.
Yeah, the first blockbuster, the movie that coined the term. And one more very interesting thing that I learned today through this Life magazine. We're not sponsored by Life magazine, but is that air conditioning had a huge impact on the success of this movie because throughout summers that would be like the dump season for studios, but as like
Oh,
malls began to develop and teenagers would start going to theaters just to like cool off and stuff like that, so they
interesting.
would go there to experience air conditioning and Jaws, and just what a
Yeah, you wouldn't
lucky.
want to sit in a hot, sweaty theater in the summer otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's when they would drop their B movies, and when nobody would go to those because the award season still to this day is during the winter,
All
and I
right.
guess that's just a holdover. But yeah, the invention of air conditioning and implementing that into theaters just kind of melded with Spielberg's vision, and I don't know if we'd have him if we didn't have the advent of air conditioning in mass malls.
Very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't heard that connection. It makes total sense though. And then and just a couple of just final notes. Just famously, this had such an impact on society in general. I mean, it actually decreased massively the amount of people going to beaches for the next 3 summers after this movie came out. And it, along with The Exorcist, was actually one of the few films that was studied in psychological studies for how much tension it for people suffering from high tension as they watch this film. So
Yeah.
Spielberg, you go back and you look at it now, and at times it's an incredibly well-made film, but by 2025 standards, maybe at times a bit slow. But man, did he know how to build tension.
Oh yeah. Yeah, very Hitchcockian for sure. And of course, John Williams with the score.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Iconic.
Just two notes,
Yeah,
epic. And he won an Oscar for that one as well.
as he should have.
So speaking of sharks,
Yeah, so that takes us to our drink break. And so we're going to do one called Shark Attack. And there are a lot of different versions of this drink online. I've seen about 20 different ones. So this is one that is kind of a combination of a few different recipes I've seen. So we'll see. We'll see if it's any good. It is basically supposed to look like a shark attack a little bit. So it has some blue curacao and rum, and then we'll sprinkle in some grenadine for the blood. First thing you want, though, is an ounce of white rum.
I'm just gonna free pour since I forgot my jigger tonight, but
I almost forgot that.
I made enough drinks to know what an ounce is.
Yeah, that's true. And an ounce of dark rum.
Okay. Are you using Bacardi or what brand are you using tonight?
I've just got some Florida Cana. Just very. Oh, but
Okay.
the white rum was Bacardi. I'm just very basic mixing rum. So yeah, the ounce dark rum. Pour it here without hitting the microphone. Then you will need half ounce of blue curacao.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you don't want too much of that.
No,
You
you
don't
don't,
want
because that is pretty strong. Okay, yeah, it gives it that blue color. Looks like
so it should
seawater.
give it the blue
Yeah.
color. Yep. And then now this is partly where I wasn't quite sure because different things say different things. But I gotta go with 2 ounces of lemonade.
All right, I got my Simply Lemonade.
I've got brisk. And
Brisk. I didn't even know that brand was still around.
yeah, I found it at the store yesterday. I was like, hey, brisk. So then I'm gonna mix that up in I'm gonna mix that up in my cocktail shaker. And just for those listening, I'll do that close to the microphone so you can hear me mixing up. Then pour it all in. And so, yeah, you can see that it looks like a very nice, beautiful turquoise ocean there. But then along comes the shark.
Dun, dun,
And
dun.
you're just supposed to dribble a little bit of the grenadine in. Oh, yeah, look at that. The blood. Let's see if people on screen can see that a little. There we go. The blood gets mixed in as the shark attacks. So it looks pretty cool. What about the taste? Let's go here. Unsolicited drink reviews. What do we got?
And I put a maraschino cherry in mine because I just have those left over, and it has
Okay.
grenadine in it, so
That's
still
not
gets the
that's not terrible. It's refreshing, but it's strong enough that it doesn't just
Oh,
come across as totally sweet and syrupy. So yeah, that's not
no,
bad,
I
I
like
think.
that. I really like that. I thought it was gonna be too sweet when you sent me the recipe,
Me
but
too. Me too, actually. But
no, with the combo, the rum combo, yeah, you can still taste the booze, which
yep.
is what I'm after. Because if you, as soon as you can't taste the booze, then you're in real trouble because you're just gonna keep drinking it. But
Yeah, then you're just drinking,
hmm.
yeah, some
No,
blue
I
fruity
really
drink.
like that.
That is not bad at all. So shark attacks or anybody this summer. Yeah, go have that.
All right, yeah. Great summer drink too. Great color, great balance of refreshing and with the alcohol. Yeah. Good pick, Martin.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so then we have Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. As with his previous two major studio movies, this went overtime and over budget, despite nearly but but studios just I guess after this one just kind of learned to sit back and let
Yeah.
Spielberg do his thing because despite the budget of only 20 million, Close Encounters made about 300 million at the box office. Crazy for that day, especially. Um, so stars Richard Dreyfuss. He has family problems and alien problems too. Overall, it's a great metaphor for the importance of diplomacy and communication between disparate cultures, and we really need that today. Like today.
Damn, yes. Damn, do
Like
we
right
ever.
now.
Right now. Yeah, this one also, I mean, pretty iconic score, just iconic, great moments. This one also had a lot of development in terms of special effects that people hadn't really seen before, or how they made the ships move and the lights and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Just a groundbreaking film. Again, going if people go back and watch it with 2025 eyes, probably seems a bit slow, but just this is a master filmmaker coming into his own at this point. You can really see him just sort of exponential growth on his part in terms of what he's able to do on screen.
Yeah, it's wild how talented that guy is.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Yeah.
started out as a wonderkid and just hasn't really slowed down. So
No, no. But that isn't to say there weren't some bumps in the road because 1979, he came out with a movie called 1941. Now, Spielberg was really feeling himself at this point on
hmm
the successes of Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He thought, you know what? I'm going to try to make a comedy. And so he made this comedy, which is based on the panic on the West Coast after Pearl Harbor when people really thought there'd be a Japanese invasion. Kind of an odd topic for a comedy, but it kind of fits. Maybe sort of along the lines of a
Strange Love.
Strangelove, Doctor Strangelove kind of thing. This was the screenplay for this was by Robert Zemeckis, interestingly enough, which was his second made feature script. And keep that name in mind because they'd work together again, obviously, in the future as when Spielberg is doing more producing. And this one had mixed reviews. I mean, it made money, but it wasn't a big success. It was the 22nd highest grossing film of 1979. So not a flop, but not a massive success like the last two movies. There isn't too much to say about this one, really. It's yeah, it's okay. And people, it probably is a. I was gonna say it's better in hindsight. I'm not sure if it is. I think people at the time weren't really sure what it was and weren't ready for it. People might be more willing to embrace that kind of thing today, but it's definitely not one of his stronger efforts.
No, definitely not. But then we have another. He rebounded very quickly and very
And did he ever?
forcefully with Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981. You know, Indiana Jones, another household name. The fedora wearing, whip wielding archaeologist slash adventurer has appeared to this day in five films, with the first four directed by Spielberg. The concept of the character was thought up by George Lucas while he and Spielberg were on vacation together following their massive successes in the late 70s. For full coverage of Raiders of the Lost Ark, please check out our 80s podcast on Spotify. But in the interest of brevity, we're not going to cover all these films individually. Rather, we'll just talk Indy as a whole right now. Um, so, Raiders and Spielberg are responsible for America's PG-13 rating. Spielberg had been trying since Jaws to make these elusive four quadrant movies that everyone of any age would enjoy, but he had to tone down the violence in several of his movies to avoid an R rating, which would definitely kill his box office performance. But since he had a major influence in the world of filmmaking now, he pitched a brand new rating system to the stick up their ass MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, and now we have the most popular rating of them all. For example, every Marvel movie that's ever been made has been PG-13, and they owe that to Spielberg. So the series began with Raiders in 81 and ended, hopefully, pray with 2023's The Dial of Destiny. It's one of the most successful franchises in film history, though, spawning a TV series, novels, theme park, rides, and merch sales that would make your head spin.
Yeah, but I think the only three we really need to concern ourselves with are Raiders, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade. And they are great movies. Temple of Doom is a lot darker than the others, and there are some reasons
Mm-hmm.
for that. Both Lucas and Spielberg were going through divorces at the time, and there's just it's not quite as fun as the first and third ones. For me, for my money, Last Crusade has always been my favorite. I just love that movie. It's so good, and Sean Connery. I okay, Sean Connery as a person was probably a huge piece of shit by all accounts. Abusive to his wife and all that kind of stuff. He was such a fun actor to watch, though,
Mm.
and his performance in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is one of the great comedic performances of all time. I think it's just so note
Yeah.
perfect, every
When they're
moment of
both
it.
when they're both tied to the chair, Dad, what? Dad, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just so iconic. But yeah,
Yeah. And the whole bit, and again, we're getting back to fathers and stuff, and we haven't talked in 20 years, and then Connor's character, well, what do you want to talk about? And he just sits there looking at him, and Indy's like, I can't think of a thing. He's like, well, what are we waiting? What are we talking about then? We've got work to do. But again,
yeah.
kind of bringing in all those Spielberg themes and just perfectly shot, like every moment of this movie, from the way it's cut to the chase scenes, the action sequences, the bit where he's on a motorcycle with a sidecar and he grabs the flagpole to use as almost like a knight in a joust. Like just every moment of this film
Yeah.
is so good, and so it's always been my favorite. But Raiders, as the first one, it launched a whole different kind of adventure movie.
hmm
There had been adventure movies before. I don't want to suggest that this was the first adventure movie,
Well, yeah,
but
because Lucas and Spielberg made it based on the 30 serials that they were watching back
ex
when they were kids.
yeah, exactly. But think about now, it seems like nothing, but at the time, okay, you're going to do an action adventure movie, and the main star or the main hero is an archaeologist. Like, what the fuck is that? But now it just seems okay. Yeah, that's great because it's just become so much part of our lives. I'd absolutely love the indie movies. The last two, less said about them, the better. But even them, I found some moments entertaining.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I actually only saw I actually only saw Raiders for the first time in like 2012 or something like that when I really
Oh
started to
wow.
study
Okay.
study film because I don't know, it was just seeing the last couple were just such a turn off. But yeah,
Hmm.
anyway, yeah, obviously Indiana Jones, cultural icon, will never be supplanted.
Oh. And that takes us to another cultural icon in a way, 1982 E.T. And so this is Spielberg returning to stories about aliens. And this was from an idea he had had for a while, especially as a sometimes lonely kid, about an alien befriending a young child. And so he talked the idea over with Melissa Matheson, and she wrote the screenplay. It was filmed chronologically because Spielberg thought it would be easier on the child actors. Now, for those of you who aren't insiders into how film is made, most of the time films are not made chronologically. You'll shoot everything that's going to be taking place in one area altogether, even if that means it's at the beginning of the the movie, the end of the movie, it doesn't matter. You shoot sort of location specific rather than chronologically. But Spielberg wanted to get the best out of his child actors, including Drew Barrymore, and who's the youngest. And he thought this was the best way that they could really get into the story and feel the emotions of becoming attached to this alien and then having him leave. And it absolutely worked. No question about it. E.T. himself was created with animatronics and a suit that was played by three different people, two little people and a guy who was born without legs, who sometimes walked on his hands. That's pretty amazing. And like any of these movies, I mean, they're just so iconic. There's so many big stories about this one, but one I'll note here: M&M's, the candy, was initially approached about having M&Ms be the thing that leads ET towards the house, and they refused to allow it. They didn't know what this was, even though Spielberg was the biggest director in Hollywood at that time. They said no. So Reese's Pieces stepped up and agreed instead, which resulted in a massive increase in their market share and a 65% increase in profits for the company. Um, and this kind of helped create, or at least highlight the importance of product placement, which not necessarily a good thing, but just incredibly influential. And this obviously, once again, was a massive fucking hit. It opened in June of 1982, and it stayed at number one for 6 weeks, and then jumped between number one and number two all the way until October.
Mm.
Think about that. To be honest, number one, number two. I mean, we were going crazy about the fact that Sinners, in the slowest movie time of the year, was in the top five for about 7 weeks. This is, we're talking like June, July, August, September, October, 5 months of being first or second. That's incredible.
Yeah.
It passed Star Wars to become the highest grossing film of all time. Star Wars had passed Jaws until where it remained until it was passed on by another film on our list to come. And it is today the fourth highest grossing movie of all time, adjusted for inflation. So just an unbelievable hit. And this, more than anything else, kind of made Spielberg untouchable as a bankable director, if he wasn't already before that.
Yeah, yeah, he kept topping himself over and over, and like we said, he had a few bumps in the road, but for the most part, if you bet on Spielberg, you're not going to lose. That's for damn sure. And yeah,
That is my special guest.
yeah, Martin's bringing up an ET stuffy on
This
just
this
listening.
is an original from my childhood. I still have it to this day. Original ET stuffy from when I was a kid
Oh,
that I got for Christmas. And just a little anecdote. There's that scene in the movie when the mother goes in and she looks in the closet and ET's like in the middle of all the stuffed animals and kind of hiding. So when I got this for Christmas, my brother took me up to my room, and amongst all my stuffed animals, this one was in the middle. And I spotted it. I was like,
oh,
oh, it's like in the movie. So
oh,
yeah,
that's awesome.
ET. Sorry, I interrupted you. I just had to show everybody
No,
the
no, no,
original
please.
ET stuffy. This is probably actually worth money these days. It's been in a trunk for the last 30 years, 40 years. But
Yeah, it still looks great.
yeah,
But yeah, oh, yes, but I mean, I'm sure so many people have those kind of anecdotes of ET because it was just such a seminal part of so many people's childhood, and that's why Spielberg's Spielberg.
yeah,
Really, I mean, he's such a huge part of everyone's lives, even if they don't know like specifically which films he directed or which project he's worked on. He's just if you've seen any films, you've probably seen a Spielberg film,
yeah.
and that's case in point right there. And yeah, I just rewatched ET last night for the first time in a long, long time, and Man, it still hits. And of course, John Williams with his score, and anytime the kids take off on the bikes and dun 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 dun, dun, dun. It's just, I mean, it's
Yeah.
goosebump inducing every single time, no matter what.
I rewatched it for the first time this past week as well, and first time in a little while. And I'd forgotten the score, just how amped up it gets at the very end when the
Yeah,
kid is leaving.
man.
Like his score is really like bombastic and everything. I had kind of forgotten that, but yeah, he really hits it home.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we have a Poltergeist in 1982. It's a lot of times it's falsely attributed to Spielberg as a director. Honestly, until last week, I thought he directed it as well. So that shows my ignorance. But he only came up, I'll say only, he only came up with the story and wrote it. So it's no small feat, but it was in fact directed by Tobe Hooper, who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a couple of other great horror movies. It's on many people's lists of greatest horror movies of all time, and that just kind of showcases Spielberg's massive range.
Definitely. And then we come to The Color Purple in 1985. By 85, Spielberg was the biggest director in the world, like no question about it. He was also starting to get a little bit of criticism, that, oh, he's just the glitzy box office guy, or he's the studio man, or he can't tell real stories. And all those types of comments got to him. And so he wanted to prove that he could do great dramatic filmmaking as well. So he decides to do a film adaptation of Alice Walker's difficult book about an African American woman who survives abuse and bigotry in Georgia in the early 20th century. It starred Whoopi Goldberg, Danny Glover, and Oprah Winfrey in her film debut. It was a pretty big box office success. It made like six times its budget and a really big critical success. It was nominated for 11 Oscars, including Best Picture and nominations for Goldberg, Winfrey, and Margaret Avery. Spielberg, though, did not get a nomination for director amongst those 11, and it didn't win any of them. In retrospect, I don't think it's seen as well critically. Even Spielberg has kind of admitted that he probably wasn't the right guy, especially at that time in his life, to tell that story. He
Yeah.
shied away from some of the more graphic parts of the book. Um, and the other thing about this is that notably this movie did not have a score by John Williams. It was scored by Quincy Jones instead, one of the very few Spielberg movies.
Probably a smart move, though,
Yes. Yeah,
considering how
I think so.
whimsical John Williams is. Yeah.
Yeah. Not that John Williams can't do serious, as we'll see in part two coming next week.
The yeah, the color the if Steven Spielberg came out today and said he's directing The Color Purple, it would have a massive backlash, and
Yeah,
probably rightly so. Like
probably.
it's a black movie that probably should be directed by somebody who has not necessarily that experience because nobody's alive from the early 20th century, but
Right, right.
somebody who has the black experience.
Yeah,
But
probably
there
somebody
were
like Ava DuVernay or somebody like that.
yeah,
Well, and obviously they just had the I don't know if you really want to call it a remake, but the movie last year, which was based upon the musical, based upon the book.
right.
So
So yeah, but at that point in time, it was weird. But Spielberg, I think his mind was in the right place and his heart was in the right place.
yeah,
But going back, yeah, it's not a very good look.
and obviously he isn't, not to say, oh, I've got a black friend, that kind of thing. He isn't ignorant to African American
No,
people. He's adopted, some of his adopted kids are African American, but he's still not quite the right guy.
yeah, that's what I meant by his mind's in the right place. Like
Yeah,
I'm sure he's
yeah,
trying to elevate all these black actresses
yeah.
into, you
Well,
know,
and he did. I mean, Whoopi Gold. This was the breakout hit for Whoopi Goldberg, and
right.
obviously Oprah has a bunch of other things going on, but this was her film debut. And Danny Glover, at this point, yeah, he had already been in Lethal Weapon, so he was pretty much a household name, but it was still a
Hmm.
pretty big movie for him.
Right. So then we had The Goonies, which is another one that's a lot of times misattributed to Spielberg as director, but he was just I keep putting in quotes, just a producer. But
Well,
but yeah,
and he came up with the story, I think.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not like the executive producer credit where you just throw a bunch of money at a project and all of a sudden you're in the main credits. No, like he was an integral part of coming up with this, project. So
Yeah.
it's worth mentioning
Yeah.
because it's a staple of the mid 80s cinema and one of the primary influences along with E.T. for Stranger Things, whose final season should be coming out sometime before the main cast all turn 40.
We can hope. Yeah. Yeah, we should also note that this the screenplay, Spielberg was integral in coming up with the story, but the screenplay was written by Chris Columbus,
Mm,
who and Spielberg basically helped make his career. This is another one of these guys that you see a lot of people kind of owe a lot to Spielberg, like Robert Zemeckis and others. And Chris Columbus, he had written some scripts, and he was shopping around his script actually Gremlins,
mm.
and wasn't getting much pickup. And Spielberg as a producer, we'll get into that next week when we talk a little bit more of Spielberg as producer, but he optioned Gremlins, and then that's how they kind of got to know each other, and that's how Chris Columbus came to write to the actual screenplay for Goonies.
Yeah, to Spielberg's credit, he's definitely one of those guys that climbs the ladder and then throws the ladder back down,
Absolutely.
which
Yeah.
is not something you can say about a lot of successful Hollywood guys. Once they get up there, they're just like, okay, I made it. But
Yeah.
yeah, Spielberg is always looking out for the next generation, and he's still doing that to this day. So yeah,
Yeah, I think he's definitely a competitive guy, but he isn't jealous of others' success,
yeah, yeah. Good
which
point.
is
Yep.
which is great. And then in 1987, we had Empire of the Sun. This was still Spielberg in his dramatic phase after Color Purple. It's a coming of age war film written by Tom Stoppard. Interestingly, like he's worked with incredible people himself, based on the semi-autobiographical novel by J.G. Bullard. It's about a British kid caught up in a Japanese POW camp in Shanghai. So that was when we think about Japanese internment camps, this was the other side. This was the
Yeah.
Japanese imprisoning mostly Chinese in Shanghai. And then obviously some foreigners got caught up as well during World War II. This is probably most notable because it introduced the world to a young Christian Bale. It was nominated for six Oscars, but once again, just like Color Purple, not a directing nomination for Spielberg.
Yeah, and thank you, Steven Spielberg, for finding Christian Bale for us.
Hmm.
I'm sure Christian had some bit parts and some things earlier, but he was the star of, of,
He
of
was.
this particular movie, and
Yeah.
here we are with him being one of the greatest actors of our time.
Yeah, and once again, Spielberg honing in on those themes of kids caught up into sort of adult world and trying to
Hmm.
deal with all the issues around them. And
Yeah,
family separation. Again, that all these themes just keep coming up again and again in these movies for Spielberg.
yeah. No matter what genre it is, he definitely has these themes, and yeah,
Yeah.
as you said, they keep coming up and coming up again, but they're not. So yeah, he's not like beating you over the head with these themes though. They're just like
Nope.
underlying things that if you really study his career, you'll find. But if you're just
Yeah.
watching the movie,
And for as much as Spielberg does sometimes get criticized for being kind of a surface level director,
mm,
it's all these themes I think that add depth to a lot of these movies.
I agree 100%. Yep. So yeah, Last Crusade came out in 1989, but we already talked about Indy, and then we have Always in 1989. It's a romantic fantasy film starring Richard Dreyfuss, Holly Hunter, and Audrey Hepburn in her final film role. It was not a success financially nor critically, but it was a passion project of Spielberg's from pretty much the time he started making movies. And he has these little like interjections of these movies that he like really wants to make, and then they kind of fall flat.
Yeah, I realized I actually lied earlier when I said that Sugarland Express was the only theatrical release of Spielberg's from his early days that I hadn't seen. I,
Mm.
I actually don't think I've ever seen Always, and so don't have much to comment on it. It's probably, obviously for me because I've never seen it, but I think just in general, one of the most forgettable of Spielberg's entire catalog.
Yeah, it was like a ghost of an ex a dead fighter pilot's ghost coming and like infusing Richard Dreyfuss, who is another fighter, modern fighter pilot, infusing him with his knowledge. Yeah, I didn't get all the way through it just because it was honestly kind of boring.
Okay, yeah. And his third time working with Richard Dreyfuss, I guess, is
Mhm.
is the notable thing after Jaws and Close Encounters. All right. Then we've got 1991, we've got Hook, which was a Peter Pan story, basically starring Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman, and Julia Roberts. It was basically just trying to get big stars into a Peter Pan story. It made money. Like it was the fourth highest grossing film of 1991. It even received some Oscar nominations somehow. But over, I think mostly in the technical categories. But overall, it's not really considered one of his better films. The tone of it was kind of all over the place. It just like obviously he wanted to do this, and Robin Williams is brilliant. I wish that they had had a better movie for the sensibility, for the chaotic humor of Robin Williams and
Mm.
the filmmaking sensibilities of Spielberg. I wish they had found a better project to collaborate on.
Yeah, it's a really great point. This was my late cousin Kyle's favorite movie growing up. So I have a little bit of an emotional connection to this one, but I still don't think it's a great movie.
No.
But then that leads us to dun 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 dun, dun. I really wish we could put in music and not wait 30 days for it to
Yeah, for
clear.
YouTube to get their shit together. Yeah.
We have Jurassic Park in 1993, written by Michael Crichton, who also wrote the novel, and frequent Spielberg collaborator David Cope. It stars Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, and Richard Attenborough, with Wayne Knight Newman and an up-and-coming
As,
Samuel L.
as
Jackson.
the main villain, Wayne Knight, the one who causes the whole problems.
Yeah, I guess he is. I guess he is the primary antagonist if you don't
Yeah.
include the actual dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all his fault.
Yeah. So, anyway, you know it, you love it, you know the plot. Dinosaurs are de-extincted by misguided scientists using dino DNA, and chaos ensues. It made over $1 billion on a $63 million budget, truly cementing Spielberg as one of the all-time box office greats.
Yeah, this is
Gen
the movie that knocked E.T. off the all-time list.
yeah, so he's knocking down his own dominoes. So generated multiple number one blockbuster hits across 3 decades at this point. Spielberg has, and his name on any project was virtually guaranteed to generate massive profits for all involved. It once again for Spielberg spawned a multi-billion dollar franchise with sequels, spin-offs, theme park rides, and toys galore.
The next one of which I think is your final choice in our summer blockbuster draft, the next Jurassic World movie.
Correct.
This movie is iconic for a number of reasons. It's very interesting too because at heart it's a movie about the dangers of technology and the famous line by Jeff Goldblum's character, you always thought about whether or not you could, you never thought about whether or not you should in terms of technological advances.
Yeah, and here we are.
And here we are. Yeah, and that stuff still sticks with us today. It is interesting though that happened in a movie that was so technologically ahead of its time and that
Good point.
really set the stage for so much that has happened since in terms of CGI. There's in that documentary that you mentioned earlier, there's this great little scene where Spielberg and the other people involved in Jurassic Park are called into some guy's office who had been working on some of the effects. And he showed them the first version of the computer generated dinosaurs that he had been working on. And it just blew their minds. And they realized in that moment that this was going to change filmmaking. And it absolutely did. And it has. So it is interesting that kind of contradiction that it added a whole technological element to filmmaking in a movie that was about the dangers of technological advancement.
Yeah.
But it's just one of the most incredible movies. And at the time, seeing those dinosaurs, seeing that come to life on the screen in a way that we'd never really been able to see before. Spielberg, basically, it happened because Spielberg wanted the dinosaurs to move and run. And
Yeah,
all the
what he couldn't have during Jaws is what he was
yeah,
finally able to achieve. Yeah.
yeah, and all the animatronics people who that up to that point, that's how you did creatures like this. They were like, well, we can do these great things. It'll look good, but there's no way it can move. There's no way it can run. And he kept saying, no, it has to run. It has these dinosaurs. They have to be fast. They have to move. And this was the solution. And so now, yeah, think about any blockbuster since 1993, and this is what's been at the heart of it.
Yeah, that one moment where Sam Neill takes Laura Dern by the head and twists it, and we see the Brontosaurus.
Yeah,
I mean, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about that moment, but I was only 3 or 4 years old, so obviously I wasn't in the theater at that point. But I can only imagine somebody being in the theater and seeing that level of innovation for the first time.
yeah,
And our boy Tom Holland from the Rest is History podcast says that that's his favorite movie moment of all time, and
nice.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, just crazy to think about how technologically forward that movie was.
yeah. But also on that moment, getting back to Spielberg's just talent, he had the good sense to, in that shot, you don't see the dinosaurs first.
Hmm.
He lingers on their reactions first.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
first you see Sam Neill, and he sort of takes off his hat and takes off his sunglasses, and Jeff Goldblum, and then you see all their reactions until finally, yeah, he, as you said, he turns Laura Dern's head because she's looking down at a plant that she's excited about seeing because it had been extinct for 60 million years or whatever. And so it's a good 30 seconds of us seeing their awe first before we actually see what they're reacting to. And so not only are the dinosaurs, and especially in 1993, seeing that on the screen, incredible, but we're already conditioned to be awe-inspired by what we're about to see because of what the characters on the screen are doing. And that's just, brilliant filmmaking by Spielberg.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we have one of the all-time quotes that never made it to the AFI 100 all-time quotes, but Sam Jackson just saying, "Hold on to your butts."
Yeah, you know what? The funny thing is, I always forget that Sam Jackson's in this movie until I rewatch it every, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. I'm like, oh yeah, right, Sam Jackson's in this.
Yeah, I just did that today. That's the one I was saving for last, and yeah, it was like, oh yeah, Sam Jack, and he kills it as he
Yeah,
always
he
does.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He's not like screaming over the top Sam Jackson. He's just good.
yeah, no motherfucker or anything
Yeah,
like
yeah, that's right. He doesn't say motherfucker once.
that.
But somebody get these motherfucking dinosaurs off this motherfucking island.
Yeah, so that's it for part one of our coverage of Steven Spielberg. We'll get
Yes.
into his TV project, his multiple entertainment companies, and much, much more. Will he break out of his popcorn movie director persona? Will he be taken seriously as an artist and a director? Will he finally gain the respect of his peers and win that elusive Oscar? Tune in next time and find out on the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. I'm Zach Miller. He's Martin Cook. We'll see you next week.
Bye.